Well, a big show ahead. Let's get straight into it with Home Affairs Minister, or rather Shadow Home Affairs Minister. I'm getting ahead of myself. James Patterson. Senator, before we move on to other issues, just want to get your reaction to the PM congratulating Usman Khawaja for his courage. What did you think of those comments?
My view, James, is that politicians like myself and the Prime Minister would be well advised to stay out of regulating the lawful conduct and speech of sports players like Usman Khawaja. He's entitled to have whatever views he likes and express them consistent with Cricket Australia's policy. The reason why I think we should stay out of it is because sometimes you get caught out being inconsistent. You might remember that 3 years ago in 2019, there was another sports star who was expressing views publicly. This time it was a rugby player, not a cricket player. This time it was a Christian and not a Muslim. And this person, Israel Folau, got a very different response from the then opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, when he expressed his sincerely held beliefs. He was sacked from his role, and then opposition leader Anthony Albanese called him reprehensible. So on the one hand, you're reprehensible for expressing your sincerely held views, and on the other hand, you're courageous. And I think that shows an inconsistency from the Prime Minister, and he'd be well advised to stay well out of this sport and politics.
Indeed. Well, let me talk to you about another of the government's failures, and that's their complete failure to respond properly to the High Court ruling that saw 148 asylum seekers and criminals released into the community. No supervision. The government was left scrambling. It's been a total mess. Already 5 of those have been arrested, one for alleged sexual assault, another for allegedly making contact with a child without a reasonable excuse. And today we find out another 2 have been arrested. Brand new year, same old problems.
Australians will be deeply concerned that while Anthony Albanese's ministers are having a nice holiday, the criminals that they let out into the community haven't taken a break at all from the crimes that they've committed against the Australian people. And the whole reason why the Parliament rushed through before Christmas a preventative detention regime, which the Coalition had been urging the government to do for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they finally agreed to do, was for circumstances like this. We foresaw a time when some of these people released from indefinite detention would reoffend in the community against Australians, and we thought that they should be locked up if they did so. Well, as we stand here today, not one person has been preventatively detained under that regime that we passed before Christmas. So the question is, where's the Minister for Home Affairs? Where's the Minister for Immigration? What are they doing? Why haven't they applied to the courts to get these dangerous criminals off the streets where they can't pose a risk to the Australian community?
Well, I think we know where they are. They're all on holidays, aren't they?
Well, sadly, I think that is the reason why no action has been taken to protect the community. But I remember these politicians, when they were in opposition, were highly critical of, for example, the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison for taking a holiday. So they're hardly in a strong position to be failing to do their own jobs because they're on holidays, particularly when it comes to something as fundamental as the safety of the Australian community. Really, I think they need to be back in the office, back at work, getting these people off the streets so that Australians can feel safe again.
Indeed. Let's change tack slightly. I want to ask you a question, and give me a second to set this up. But what do you have to say in this country to get arrested for hate speech? The Australian reported overnight that an Islamic cleric gave a sermon on New Year's Eve describing Jews as, and I quote, descendants of pigs and monkeys. Here he is.
These worshippers of Iblis, yes, the descendants of pigs and monkeys, are stealing the organs of your brothers and sisters. It wasn't bad enough that they killed them, they also want to take their organs. They took their houses, they took their lands, and now they want their organs. But we want to watch fireworks.
And the centre's cleric, Abu Assad, has form. Here he is in October.
Our brothers and sisters in Gaza are being killed, annihilated by the descendants of apes and monkeys, of swine and monkeys.
Vilifying people as thirsty work. This comes as police drop their investigation into another Muslim cleric, Brother Ismail, who told his Sydney congregation there would come a day when even the trees would help people to kill Jews. We showed that clip on the program last night. Senator, it would be easier to get a reduction on your power bill under this government than to get arrested for hate speech, wouldn't it?
Sadly, I think that's exactly right, James. As you pointed out, this is repeated behaviour from these 2 clerics. They have been engaging in the most reprehensible extreme rhetoric and what appears to me to be very clear incitement to violence against people in our community on the basis of their faith. It should have no place in Australia. It should be condemned by every political leader, and even better than that, the police and our prosecutors should follow through with the laws that are already on the books at the state and federal level and throw the book at people who are engaging in this irresponsible rhetoric, because I'm deeply fearful that this rhetoric will lead to very real violence in our streets and our communities. And when that happens, we'll all feel terrible and wonder, how did it happen? Well, we shouldn't wonder how it happened. We let people get away with this inflammatory rhetoric, this incitement to violence. We didn't enforce the law. They continue to do it, and somebody was inspired to undertake an act of violence as a result.
Well, I want to ask you about that, because police investigated some of those comments and said, no, it didn't meet the threshold of hate speech. Is this a lack of courage on behalf of law enforcement and government, or is there problems with the law that need to be addressed?
I find it very difficult to understand how this conduct does not meet those thresholds. We've passed extensive laws against this kind of conduct at both the state and the federal level over a number of years. It is unlawful in this country to incite someone to commit an act of violence against someone else for any reason, but including for their race or their religion. It is an offence in this country to use a carriage service to menace and harass someone. A carriage service includes the internet. So putting up content on the internet which is menacing or harassing towards members of the community is also an offence. I don't understand why police and prosecutors haven't laid charges against these people. I think we need to have a very good look at the directions that they're getting from their ministers and why they haven't been putting pressure on them to act.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I reckon you'll get your $275 power bill saving before you'll get anyone arrested on hate speech or vilification or incitement charges. Look, we've just seen an Australian man killed in Lebanon where he was fighting for Hezbollah. You've called for parts of Lebanon to be designated a no-go zone to prevent more Australians going to fight with the terror group, which seems eminently sensible. How's the government received your request? Has there been any response?
Unfortunately, the only response we've had is a very dismissive one from the Health Minister, Mark Butler, who was sent out today to say that we've already given travel advice that people shouldn't go to Lebanon, therefore that's enough. Well, that's not enough, because clearly people are still travelling to Lebanon. At least one Australian has been claimed by Hezbollah as a fighter, and after he died, had a full military funeral with all the Hezbollah honours. So it's very clearly a problem, and I'm deeply concerned that there'll be more Australians who'll seek to go there. And this is a problem for us because those people will go, they'll fight, they'll become radicalised, they'll become skilled, and some of them will try and come back to this country and threaten us here at home. And so we should prevent them from leaving in the first place. And the government's got an enormous range of tools to do so, one of which is to declare an area of the world as a designated area within which, if you go, you are committing an offence because it's deemed that there's terrorist activity likely taking place there and you're likely to be participating in it. You have to prove yourself that you're not engaging in terrorism. Now, the government has that tool available to them. They haven't taken it up, they haven't used it, but there are others as well. You can cancel people's passports, you can charge them for leaving the country to fight for a terrorist organisation. There's a range of tools available, but if they're not being used, then I'm worried that's sending a message to the community that there's no consequences for this behaviour.
Yeah, for all their talk about, security being our highest priority, this government seems to have a lot of other priorities, like The Voice and taking holidays. Speaking of this government's failures, and I'll speak more about this in a moment with security and defence expert Peter Jennings, but Iran has now sent a warship to the Red Sea. Now, they say the ship is there to secure shipping lanes and repel pirates, which is hilarious when you consider it's Iran-backed Houthi rebels doing the pirating. But the government in Australia really stuffed up by not agreeing to help the United States-led coalition by sending a warship, didn't they?
I agree, James. I think the Ayatollah should appear before the next Melbourne Comedy Festival with lines like that. But you're also right that this is another weak decision on national security from the Albanese government. It's a pattern of behaviour from this government. They turn away from the tough calls. They refuse to back our allies. They refuse to back our friends. And they sit on the sidelines and they let others do the heavy lifting. And I think this is a shameful day in Australia's defence and national security policy. We could have made a tangible contribution to this UN-led coalition. We were asked to do so, but we've chosen not to do so. And I think that reflects terribly on the Prime Minister and his weak leadership. I suspect it's just because he fears what the domestic political implications would be of contributing to this. But Australia's interests are very clear here. We want the international shipping through the Red Sea to be restored. We want it to be stable because we're a trading nation. We need the open trading system to get the commodities we need to make our economy function.
Indeed. Senator James Paterson, thanks so much for your time tonight.